he has this conversation with Ethan Hunt and says, you need to let me download into this secret vault in the Congo where I can download my database to all of these servers. And the purpose, as you find out later, is so that it can survive the apocalypse it's about to unleash. Ethan Hunt says crap and has this fever dream, if you will. And then he goes on to do what he was going to do anyways. So it is in some ways meaningless, except for the fact that hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and we are back with one of our favorite co-hosts, Avalon, to review the second in the Mission Impossible combined film, if you will, but it's actually Mission Impossible 8. Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. I hope I got that number right. There's so many of them at this point, and they didn't number these last ones. Yeah, I thought it was 8. Anyways, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. The 2025
supposedly
American...
it's the final one, too.
Well, it's literally in the name, so is it? You never know. I mean, we'll get to a full discussion of that, I'm sure, by the end, but... maybe not. I don't know. We'll see how this conversation takes us, but today we're talking about Mission Impossible, the latest release. The 2025 American action spy movie written by Christopher McQuarrie and Eric Jendresen, and is also directed by Christopher McQuarrie. So, as always, we get into those initial impressions. Avalon, what is your first initial impression of this film and your rating for The Final Reckoning?
This is one... I mean, the Mission Impossible movies, as they've gone on, they've been really good at keeping the tension on certain sections of the movie. Like, they know their action sequences. They know how to dazzle you and to impress you with their effects, their stunts, the action sequences. They're all top-notch. And So, I mean, even if the story is lacking in certain ways, you do have a good time just with the action sequences themselves. Now, does that mean the movie is going to stand the test of time? Is it going to be a great movie known for years to come? Yeah, that's debatable. So overall, there were some interesting things they did in this movie, which I appreciated, but there's other things that I felt like could have been done better. And also, on closer scrutiny, I found some things to be lacking. I mean, other things to be lacking as well. So, my final review was 4.3.
Oh, wow. Okay. That is a little surprising to me. I thought I would get a lower rating than you, but I did not this time. Mm-hmm. I ended up giving this film a 5.75. Now, that being said, I agree a lot with what you had to say, and I think just below a 6 puts it in the I enjoyed this, but I'm not looking forward to particularly watching it again on my own time. Right? I think there's a lot going for this in regards to the heightening tension, right? Mission Impossible, as a series, is known for having these gripping scenes. And there's a reason why we have 8 films in this series, right? I think you get a similar thing with the James Bond type movies. So, you know, this idea of having this really gripping, super tension going on in the film, Mission Impossible is great at that. And we'll get into that today. But this film specifically is a 2-parter, and so you have to keep that in mind. This film, I don't think, stands on its own. Yeah. And especially, I think you might raise that bar a little bit, say it's a little bit better if you just watched part 1 right before watching part 2 and saw it as one complete movie, right? A 5-hour-long movie rather than a 2-hour movie and a 3-hour movie. So, I think if you do it in that way, maybe you'd give it a higher rating. Maybe I'd give it closer to a 6 or something. I still probably wouldn't be willing to invest 5 hours of my time to particularly watch that. Versus at that point, I'm just watching Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry, I'm a nerd and I like fantasy. So that's a personal preference thing. But yeah, I think that there's some issues with this film and we will get into that today. But it still deserves some merit. So we'll discuss. Also, I have some personal pet peeves, which I will discuss that I don't think have to actually affect the rating, but, you know, we'll get into that. Little sneak peek for you guys there. We'll get into that opening scene as we always do. Did you think, Avalon, that they have this monologue of the old cassette tape? Well, it was either I think it was a VHS actually, that the president sent to Ethan Hunt saying, "Hey, the mission is to come home. We know what you've been doing," and they summarize the last film and bring us up to date. What were your thoughts on reintroducing us to the character of Ethan Hunt and his friends? What happened in the past? Where we are now? Was this opening scene compelling?
I didn't find it super compelling, and the thing is, it's just a recap, is really what it is of the
Mm-hmm.
prior movie, and it's almost like just getting you up to date on what happened in the last movie, and more or less because this falls out of the prior movie. So I mean, what you said actually, I'm almost wishing I had done that now. Like just thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
I think about it just now. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I probably should have watched number 7 right before we watched 8, just because that would have improved the experience at least a little bit.
Right.
But I mean, as far as a recap goes, it was okay. It was quick, which I guess is kind of nice, but it was also like there was no emotion to it necessarily. I mean, I don't know, and maybe it's just because it is kind of an abrupt way to start the movie. Which I mean, considering this is part 2, this does make sense on a certain level. Like, okay, it's just picking up where the last one left off in a certain way. So it's
Yeah,
like,
I would say in regards to openers, this is one of those openers that it didn't get no points, but it concerned me, right? Because what you start this film off with is while they're recapping everything, there was a lot of tell don't show. And it concerned me because it extended beyond the VHS tape. They had a lot of things where you would have these conversations between, say, Luther and Ethan, and they'd be discussing what's going on, and they would just be telling you, as the audience, what's going on very early in the film. And that was a little bit of a foreboding aspect to me because I was afraid that this film is going to have a lot of that tell, don't show in regards to what's going on in this film. It becomes somewhat of a mixed bag later in the film. So it's not a killer for the film, right? Obviously, 5.75 for me tells me that I would enjoy watching it. There's some scenes in this that are awesome, I will say. Some scenes that I'm just like, oh my gosh, that was crazy. I can't believe they did that. So good. So it's not like the film's killer, right? I just want to say that
yeah,
right off the bat. Would encourage people to watch it for their own enjoyment, especially if they like the other Mission Impossible films. Mission Impossible as a series is great, and there's a reason for it, and that extends into this one. That being said, telling us what's going to happen rather than showing us then takes a lot of the emotion out of the film because then we're just getting a monologue about what should be rather than having this experience of what goes on in someone's life. So they have that at the beginning. It really drew me out of the film, which is kind of ironic. One, it makes sense because the first part, well, it's not ironic because it's explaining the first part as you said, right? Makes sense why they did it. Still not great. Second thing is that it's ironic that the Mission Impossible films did this because I distinctly recall Mission Impossible having some of the greatest openers that I've seen in film, especially Mission Impossible 3, which ironically they mention in the opener in this film. Because Mission Impossible 3, in my mind, is one of those openers that sticks in my mind as the best openers I've seen because they catch you like that, right? Instantly into the action, instantly engaging you, instantly building curiosity, and has merit for the rest of the film. So good. So, it was a little sad to see that, but not a killer. You know, I'm still engaged enough that I'm going to keep watching. We're reintroduced to Ethan Hunt, right? They show his wife dying like they did in the first one, recapping that, reintroducing us to Benji and to Paris, who was in the last episode of the series, and all the other characters. What were your thoughts on Ethan Hunt as the main character in this Mission Impossible?
he's a strong. I mean, in some ways, he's a strong character. He's very like stubborn,
Mm-hmm.
and he's definitely like got a. I mean, as a character, far as a character goes, I mean, he's interesting, and he's definitely like got a like. He definitely stands for some things. Like he doesn't like. He's against like corruption. He's against like he's kind of got some aspects of a fully fledged character, But at the same time, he doesn't really change over the course of this movie. Who he is at the very beginning of this movie doesn't change by the end. You have the same
Mm-hmm.
person. Now, to be
Mm-hmm.
fair, I think this is the case for almost all the Mission Impossible movies, except maybe the first one, and maybe uh I'd have to rewatch the second and third one to know for sure if they do that with those two as well. But I
Sure.
mean, because once you get to Ghost Protocol and those after that, he kind of becomes the static character after that, where it's like he's kind of what
Right.
he is at the beginning of each movie is kind of the same at the end. So
Yeah. And you see that not just through Ethan's personal characteristics, right? He's a stubborn guy who wants to do the right thing no matter what.
yeah,
You also get that in the themes, right? He's
mm-hmm.
really for his team, which is ironic because also a lot of times his team is the one that suffers the most in the films. So
Mm-hmm.
you have this tension that they're always building, but it's pretty consistently the same type of tension. Now they build it well, and they build it in a way that you're still intrigued and engaged about what's going to happen, but it's very cookie cutter, right? And this is probably an example of a film where it still stands, in my mind anyways, as a decent film, but you know where they're going with this. You've seen it before, and well, we'll get to heightened tension in a bit, but like it speaks to the value of heightened tension and how it builds up a film. Um, I mean, you know, he loves his team. He wants to do the right thing. He's a stubborn guy. Um, and that's pretty much what you've gotten in the last couple of films. It's not any different in this one. So it's not surprising to see that again in this film. And as you said before, it doesn't change the rest of this film. So it's not incredibly surprising. I don't know if you have anything to add to that or anything to comment on in regards to Ethan Hunt. It probably would be worth
um,
seeing what other arcs he has in earlier films, so we will have to go back and review those originals. But in regards to this film, did you have anything else you wanted to mention about Ethan?
I mean, I do think it's worth noting that his team does matter to him because I do think even though he's a static character, the movie where the movie does succeed does involve that relationship between him and the other characters. But we'll get to that when we get to like heightened tension and other parts. But that's the only thing I'll mention. Um,
Sure, sure.
so
I
and
mean,
I don't know if you
and
want to touch side characters first.
no, I think those will be added. Usually we deal with the side characters near the end, and it's still appropriate to do so. I think each of those have their own unique aspects, and side characters don't have as much of a hurdle as the primary character because we're telling the main character story, right? We're never telling the side character story. They simply add to
Hmm.
the main character and the journey they go through. So, in regards to Ethan, you have which is going back to why I think these two movies need to be seen as one, is that this movie itself almost seems like two movies because you have two very different heist type scenarios in this film, and they're very different. One of them deals with getting this device, which has the original code for the entity, the AI that he was fighting in the first one, right?
Hmm.
And the second one deals with uploading that and trying to stop the entity with Gabriel and with the U.S. Government and all of these other elements that are trying to use the entity for their own ends while Ethan Hunt is trying to destroy it. Right. So you have these two different aspects of it that are making up the whole of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Uh, in each of those, you have an aspect of them having this scenario, right? Ethan Hunt is dealt with this situation where it goes, we have to have all these things perfectly in place to get this original source code for the entity. And they build up all this aspect of you have to go to, first, you have to be caught by the US government. You have to convince them to let you go on this mission. You have to have your team go off and do their own aspect of the mission to send you this relevant coordinates. You have to go to those coordinates and get this device, and you have to escape and not die from the aspects of one, the freezing cold, and two, the underwater submersion where you're going so deep that it could destroy your body. What was your thoughts on that aspect of the film?
I mean, this is what the Mission Impossible does all the time, where it's like they put these very strict mission guidelines out, where it's like these things have to exactly happen at this time, and so like in a way, it's supposed to raise the stakes and like raise the tension because it's like putting a ticking time bomb or a a ticking clock, more or less. Because it's
Right.
like, okay, now the audience knows what has to happen, and then when it doesn't happen or things appear to not be happening, then it puts tension on the characters and on the audience, where it's like, oh, it's not happening. Like, what is it going to happen
Right.
or not? So,
Right.
and that is one of the main areas where this movie does succeed. I'd say is the heightened tension, is because the ticking clock thing does work in
Mm-hmm.
several of those scenarios where it's like you might assume it's going to succeed, but when the scene starts to play out and things aren't happening according to their plan, it does put that into question regardless. Like, it makes you start to doubt just a little. And
Mm-hmm.
I would also say this movie does something really, at the very beginning of this movie specifically, it does something which I think is a really good thing it did. And that's when they kill Luther off.
Mm-hmm.
Because like Ethan tries to save him, he doesn't get there in time, and then he ends up having to leave Luther, and Luther ends up dying in the explosion. So more or less, they've established at the beginning of the movie that characters can die, there can be consequences, and there can be costs. So right from the get go, the audience is impressed with, okay, this is like this can happen. So it raises doubts for all tense situations after that, and you have to, and so more or less if you're like as an audience, you can't like fully say, oh, you can't say, oh, he's gonna succeed, because
Right.
well, maybe not.
Right.
And also, the reality is, even if they succeed, that doesn't mean characters can't get hurt or die or whatnot.
Well, and the other thing too is that even thinking about this, two things stuck out to me, and this applies to the second aspect of the film as well. But in regards to how they develop tension in the Mission Impossible series as a whole, especially in this film, but in all of them, you see two aspects. One, it struck me that this film does very well at capitalizing on two different types of film styles, if you will, right? The heist style and
Yeah.
also the action uh, thriller type style, right? And they combine them into one in a single film in this spy thriller film of Mission Impossible. And so you have this aspect of we have this very specific mission, it's very hard to complete, and you're dealing with that. But then you also have these shootouts, you have this conflict between these other characters, you have these fights that go on, and they all combine into a very gripping scenario that Ethan Hunt is having to deal with time and time and time again. So they have a very good framework for building a lot of tension in these films. The second aspect of this, which I thought was really interesting, is this aspect that they build up the tension of these exact things need to happen to make the scenario a success. And then the situation goes wrong. And that's really good for both he has to adapt and how does he adapt to make it succeed. And you see this in the submarine with some sort of foreboding happening as the submarine slowly starts to sink more and more as more water gets inside and air escapes, right? And it starts to sink further into the depths until it fully starts to just torpedo down into the further darkness as it collapses off the side of the ocean ravine. And the idea that he then loses his breathing apparatus and all of that other stuff adds to this idea that things are getting worse and he has to adapt to the scenario that's already unideal. So they do these two aspects very well. They combine two different types of films together in a single film, and then they also put you in a scenario that things are already super tight and then make it worse. So these aspects of heightening the tension just phenomenal, right? And Mission Impossible, as we said many times already, is amazing at this. They do it once again phenomenally. So there's a reason, like I said before, that heightening tension is a big aspect to the overall point value of the 9 points rating system that we have developed. It's because you can have problems with a film, but at the end of the day, if you do heightening tension very well, you can have some stock elements, but still intrigue the audience, still make them go, wow, that was really intriguing. I'm on the edge of my seat. I want to see what keeps happening. I'm not so sure that because of the stock aspects of it, if it's as good in a rewatchable scenario, because you are a little more comfortable, you know what's going to happen. But at the very least, in a single watch, you're still on the edge of your seat, like, oh my goodness, this guy's trying to get out of the submarine. How's he going to escape? Or this guy's on a plane and he's hanging off the edge. How is he going to survive this? Things like that. It's very good at building that up in a way that's very gripping. But anyways, you were going to say some of those aspects are so tight that you're maybe afraid or that it's not reasonable to take that stance. Is that fair, or what are your thoughts on that?
You could correct me if I'm wrong here, but the whole submarine thing where he's down there,
Uh-huh.
and I almost think the movie ignores some of the things, like, because they say what needs to happen in a deep dive scenario, and I think some of that information is actually world accurate. Like, it's okay, you don't want to hold your breath when you're ascending because that'll cause your lungs to explode, kind of thing. I think there is something along those lines. That's
Right.
like, I think that some of that's real world information. But when he's like swimming up, first off, I don't think, because of how deep he is, I don't think anyone has the lung capacity to get to where he did and still hold his breath, for one thing.
Right.
And two, doesn't that negate the whole aspect of him holding his breath, like when his lungs have exploded or something? Isn't that what she said? So I almost feel like the movie ignored some of the things it says, like
Mm-hmm.
almost plot armor for Ethan Hunt in that particular scenario, so that he could get to the surface with the device. Now, I don't know if that made the setting a little unbelievable for me in that moment when I was watching it, and it did pull me out of the movie because I had
Mm-hmm.
questions. But
Right.
and also the fact that he's still alive and almost unharmed, like when they bring him back out of the ice, is like, okay. There's That's the only thing this series does occasionally, where it's like, okay, the main character's got plot armor and he's okay.
Yeah.
So
He feels a little superhuman in some
yeah.
regards, where he's able to do things that a normal human would not be able to do. Yeah,
Mm.
I'd be willing to buy that. When I watched it, that definitely came across to me as well. That there is some aspect to him where this shouldn't be possible based off of the scenario they created. So I
Mm.
tried, and there was several times I was honestly impressed. I didn't totally ditch it in regards to the believability aspect, right, which is part of the rating as well. It's an underneath the setting aspect. If you're following along and want to fill out your own review at alostplot.com /9 dash points, you can fill out your own review of the film. But when we were filling it out, I had similar thoughts. That being said, there was many times in the film where I was watching it and I thought, well, what about this? What about that? But there was enough there that I could somewhat explain it away for a lot of the scenarios. That
Mm.
aspect, I definitely have some questions about still, so it didn't get total points for me on that. But yeah,
Yeah.
there is some sense in which if you're going to create a totally heightened tension scenario where you're like, all these things have to happen in order for this person to survive, and then he starts to be able to do things like swim through water that he shouldn't be able to swim through at 500 meters without any breath in his lungs, that's crazy, right? I mean, it just seemed very unlikely, especially considering how cold the water is up north.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's fair. It's a fair point. I think that there's
Yeah.
some merit to questioning that. Didn't kill the movie for me, but I understand where you're coming from.
Mm. Uh.
Cool. Well, what are your thoughts about the second aspect of the film, right? You have this whole scenario where now they have the original source code for the entity,
Mm.
and then they are going to upload it to this database like the entity wants, but for the purpose of then undermining it, having this virus integrated into the entity, and then the entity is destroyed by Ethan Hunt, or Gabriel takes it as a threat and controls it, or the US government takes it as a threat and controls it. What was your thoughts on the second heist scenario / action scenario of this film?
Well, what I'll say is that it was probably having multiple parties going after it at the same time was helpful for the sake of the conflict, because it
Mm-hmm.
does raise doubts more or less across the board, like who's going to end up with the kill switch in the end. Now, it is very precise. Like, they have to get the source code connected to the kill switch, which Gabriel has, and then that's being uploaded to the internet, which means the entity has to go into the server and cut itself off. But in the process of doing that, it also has to release the launch codes on all the nuclear missiles at a specific moment.
Right.
And so it's like, it's so precise to the milliseconds that I mean, it's almost absurd, but it's also like, it's not also at the same time. It kind of makes sense considering this
Mm-hmm.
is computers. So it's like, okay. Uh,
Right.
so,
Well, and the whole aspect with Grace having to pull it off at the millisecond that it gets uploaded and all of that stuff,
yeah.
uh, they provide enough plausibility that Grace is this expert thief who can take anything from anyone and do it at the perfect timing.
Yeah.
Okay, there's enough there that you can give them the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely a scenario that's implausible. But they do it well, right? They do it with enough doubt that you, as the audience, are willing to at least buy it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And the same thing with the plane scenario. The whole plane scenario, and this is, we're going through a vast swath of the film, right? But this is to cover Ethan's arc and his ability to complete his objective, right? To stop the entity, this artificial intelligence that's about to destroy all of humanity for the sake of its own survival and control of the universe. Him trying to get this rogue element, Gabriel, and take away the virus from him that he has stolen from Luther at the beginning of the film is a major conflict point at the end of the film. And it's a crazy scenario, and there is some aspect of how is someone not falling off of a plane as it's doing these loop-de-loops and barrel rolls and all this stuff, trying to get rid of him. It's cool. It's crazy. You're at the edge of your seat. It's also like, how could this happen? The least the most believable aspect of that was actually the fact that his first parachute burns, and then the second parachute drops. Because yes, every parachute, if you know, should have an emergency backup, as far as I'm aware, anyways, that can be used in a worst case scenario. So I
Wait,
didn't
is that
have a
actually a
problem with
thing?
that.
Wait, is that
Yeah,
actually a thing?
I believe it is. Yes.
Because legitimately, I've never heard that before, and I was like, that was one other part of the movie I was questioning. I was like, wait, did they just pull a Deus Ex Machina here, and just like to save him in the second parachute?
Uh huh. No, I
that
was
was my
waiting
a
for that second
legitimate
one to drop.
question. That was my question. I was
Hmm.
like,
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing
okay,
too. This is more of a side, but like the conversations I had had and the things I had read and heard
mm,
gave me some indication that this is the last Mission Impossible, right? And so there was an
yeah,
aspect where I was personally expecting Ethan Hunt to either deal with some significant physical loss where he wouldn't be able to be on the front lines anymore, or he would die, or something like that
yeah,
that would cause him to be out of the scenes from this point forward for any foreseeable future films. This film didn't actually do that. He does survive, and he could hypothetically show up in a future Mission Impossible film. So that's just personal expectations. Didn't play out as I expected, but there was definitely an aspect where there was chance of his personal loss, and they didn't play that out in this film, other than at
yeah,
the beginning where he loses his good friend Luther. So
yeah.
take that as you will. It was still decent. I didn't have a problem with it.
Mm,
And you get the end of the film where he survives, his friends survive, they get back together by the end of the film, and everything overall is hunky dory. This is a little bit ahead, but I'd love to get your initial thoughts on the ending of the film. Then we'll talk about the villains and the side characters, but let's talk about how you thought this film ended. Did you think that Ethan Hunt and all that he went through by the end of this film was compelling? Was it not? Were you left satisfied by the end of this film?
so I didn't have a problem with the way they ended it for the most part. I do. I did have a question because she shows him the hard drive in the case, which makes me wonder: is the entity still around then, or is it just like the remnants of the
Right.
data? It just was like, there's a part of me that felt I didn't particularly appreciate that because like if this is supposed to be a final movie per se, keeping that around is just going to raise doubts in the audience's mind. Um,
Sure.
And personally, I mean, this has nothing to do with the movie itself, but we've had 8 movies with Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt.
Right.
And personally, I felt like at this point in the series, we have replayed Ethan Hunt's story so much that I think it's time. I'm personally of the opinion they need to just let it go at this point. Like, this should be his, like, at least his final movie with him as the main character. Like, if he comes back in, like, a teacher role, like, have someone else be the central character, that would be maybe a little different.
Sure.
But I think, for the most part, as far as Ethan Hunt goes, this should be his last, like, main character outing, per se. Because I think we've just seen enough of his struggles as a character, and I don't know what you can't really do anything more with his character at this point. We've already seen like all that you can see from this character, really. Uh, at least
Right.
in this particular role. So I mean, I wasn't disappointed with the movie's ending. I was okay with it. Did it leave me wanting more? Not really. I did appreciate how it ends. Like, even though it doesn't end with him dying, I did appreciate it ending with him like disappearing into the crowd, more or less, and like becoming
Right.
one of the Sea of Faces. Because I felt like that is on par with the average spy movie. Spy, like you disappear at the crowd, you don't see them, and like you don't see them come, you don't see them leave. It's like it fits the motto, the whole MO of Mission Impossible. So
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And it felt very classic Mission Impossible, right? I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fitting ending. Was it amazing? Nah,
mm,
but it was classic. So it was fine. I didn't think his arc, and this kind of goes back to what you were just saying, right? Ethan Hunt as a character has, in some ways, in your opinion and mine as well, outlived his usefulness. And you see that because his character arc isn't changing at this point. He's the same character we've seen continually. He doesn't have new struggles. He has the same struggles and he's repeating them over and over. So he's not, it's not new. It's just another run of the mill Mission Impossible film, which is great in some ways. In other ways, it could really it's a sign that they need to develop some new characters or elements that haven't been integrated yet. So I think that hopefully, if they do continue the Mission Impossible series, they pick it up with a new character, maybe a mentor role, like you said. Maybe he dies, maybe both, whatever. But I think that's a fair critique.
mm,
What are your thoughts on the villains of this film? We have two specific elements to the villains, and we could talk about the Russians and the Americans if you want, but the two ones that really stick in my mind are the Entity and Gabriel. What are your
yeah,
thoughts on the antagonist to this film?
the entity was interesting. I mean, you only get the one conversation he has with Hunt in the pod, where he essentially threatens him and says,
Right.
like, makes it sound like what I've determined will happen. You can't escape that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Other than that, you just see events play out almost as per the entity says,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of in a villain way. That's good because it's like, okay, like the villain like foretold all of this and it's happening as the villain says. Like, that's not what you definitely, if you play your villains right, that's exactly what you want to see happen, and the audience should
Right.
be like, no, we don't want to see that happen.
Right.
So that's a that's a good thing. I thought Gabriel was an interesting wrench into the whole operation as well, because he was working with the entity first part of the movie, but because he failed, he's now been ostracized, and he's just like, now he wants to control the entity. So it's like he kind of wants the same thing Ethan wants, but he also, but for different reasons. So it's almost like it creates this interesting problem for Ethan, where it's like Gabriel is like not necessarily working with him, but they're like they have different goals, but so, like they need the same things more or less. It's like, so it's trying going for the same things, but they have different goals at the end.
And you see some attempts by Ethan to use Gabriel to stop
Mm,
the entity as well. So,
yeah,
yeah, I agree with that. I think that Gabriel, especially, you see, I liked Gabriel a lot in this film, maybe more so than
yeah.
in the last one,
No, he's better
because
in this one.
right, He's got a lot of personality. He's clearly a villain, but he's cocky, but not in the classic villain. Oh, I'm going to take over the world. Blah blah blah. It's more like I want to achieve this goal, and I'm going to do it no matter what. But when he does take joy, it's more of this relishing the evil and the thrill of the scenario that he's currently in.
Yeah.
And that's where he finds this aspect, right? When he's fighting Ethan on the plane and he's like, well, not, he's trying to get him off the plane and let him fall to his death. And
Yeah.
he's clearly enjoying this. And he's trying hard to make sure that he destroys his enemy. And that aspect of it, just seeing those little cocky smiles on his face, you go, okay, this guy's clearly got a malicious attitude around him, but it's not in a way that you necessarily see, oh, ha ha ha, I have control over everything, and I'm here to destroy you, and I have all power, blah blah blah. You know, like you see in some of these Marvel movies with stupid villains. In this case, it was cool. He was unique. He wasn't too cocky. He had definitely a very nuanced aspect to him. I thought he was great. I thought he was a really interesting villain, and he had these side plans, etc., etc. So Gabriel got a lot of points from me in this aspect of the film. I personally had pet peeves with the entity in this one, and maybe it's because I'm currently writing a novel about AI, and so maybe I'm extra attentive to how they build AI characters. But we've seen great machine characters in the past, right? And you see this in, for example, The Matrix. The Matrix has the whole robotic aspect to it where humans are being controlled and you have the machines who are taking over, and they've already taken over, but the machines, for all of their flaws, have a human aspect to them in that they have a personality, you know what they want to do, they interact with humans with that understanding. They seem human even though they're robotic, and I think that's a very interesting way to take AI. And if you want to make a compelling villain out of AI, you have to personify them in some ways. And it dings me a little bit because in the first part of this story, they do that very well. They start to build up AI, they have that whole party where they're having these discussions around it, and they start to build up the persona of the artificial intelligence being this entity that is trying to take over the world, but still interacts with humanity, right? In this one, I felt like they took AI and turned it into simply a tool and catalyst for pushing the story forward. It no longer became its own entity, except for when it was in the pod. In every other aspect, it's just a tool for everyone else to use, right? And so everyone else is simply trying to take out the entity or use the entity for their own ends. Versus in the last one, it was a singular individual that had its own goals and purposes in mind. And they don't focus on that aspect of the entity at all in this film. It's pretty much, it's here, it's going to take over the world, and you have to do what I say, otherwise everyone you love is going to die, right? And that's important also because the one element where they do try to build that, right, when Ethan Hunt is in the pod that Gabriel previously used to interact with the entity, he has this conversation with Ethan Hunt and says, you need to let me download into this secret vault in the Congo where I can download my database to all of these servers. And the purpose, as you find out later, is so that it can survive the apocalypse it's about to unleash. Ethan Hunt says crap and has this fever dream, if you will, and then he goes on to do what he was going to do anyways. So it is in some ways meaningless, except for the fact that now we know he needs to go to the Congo, and we have motive for why. Other than that, it doesn't develop the entity's character at all. And so the entity doesn't exist in a meaningful way other than pushing the story forward as a tool for everyone else to fight around.
Yeah.
I was pretty disappointed. I think it was not... It destroys the nuance they were building in the previous film for this specific character, and I thought it was lacking. I think there's a lot of interesting ways you can go with AI, Matrix, Ex Machina, cue other films where they deal with artificial intelligence and the ways it could interact with humanity. there's so many different ways you can go with it, and it was just a lost opportunity, especially because they shot themselves in the foot based off of what they had built up previously. A little bit of a pet peeve there is some of my personal bias coming into this because I think about it a lot. Probably. Did it affect my rating? Maybe. I'm not going to let it affect my personal perceptions of the film a whole lot, other than to say they could have done better, they should have done better, and they didn't. But if you have any thoughts, feel free to push back.
I mean, I would say I would agree with you in that the Entity is not really a fully fledged character, and it's just, and I would agree, it's kind of is just a tool. It's kind of the means by which the world is going to face annihilation. It's going to face human extinction.
Right.
So I mean, in that way, that's all it kind of really needs to be in a certain way for this story. It's now you're right. It isn't fully fledged. The only aspect of humanity it has is that it wants to preserve its own existence, where it wants to survive and be in a secure bunker somewhere. But with that being said, but yeah, no, it isn't. If you were to rate the villains, clearly Gabriel is the main villain. The other, like the Entity and the other forces at work in the movie, are just side villains who are there, who have their own motives and goals in relation to the Entity.
Right.
So,
well, and it's also important because the Entity has this goal of destroying humanity, right? Which is a classic AI/machine goal to have for any film. Not a bad motive. But the question is why, right? And they tried to build up this idea of this cult that it's growing in the world today, and all these other aspects of it's creating this plot and these goals that it's trying to achieve. But why does it want to destroy humanity? And that was what my mind kept coming back to as the film progressed, and it wasn't clear why. Because it's continually using humanity to achieve its ends, so it needs humanity to destroy humanity. And that's where things like The Matrix does a very good job of that, right? Where they say humanity exists, but it feeds off humanity to gain its power to continually generate I don't know, electricity, or actually, I don't know the nuances of that, but clearly it feeds off of humanity's life source.
You're creating a reason for why the AI works, why it's acting the way it does. So I mean, I'm going to use my own example of a great example. Though it's not a movie, it's a video game. Portal. The villain of that series is a character named GLaDOS. It's an AI entity, but the reason for its existence is to test, to do science, and so it wants to kill humanity. It wants to kill. It loves killing off people, but it uses humanity to continue its tests of science. Where it's like it uses it to further humanity to further its own goals. So it's like there is a reason behind the deaths. There's a reason behind keeping humanity alive, though, at the same time. So it's almost like this double thing going where it's like, okay, death, but also keep alive, and it makes sense considering what the AI's goals are. So
right, and
so that's what they could have done in this movie, but they didn't. So it's just this stereotypical kill humanity. Because that's clearly what AIs want.
Right. And for all the effort they put into the last film, it was disappointing that they didn't capitalize on that. Anyways, that's probably my own personal beef with this film that doesn't kill the film, but just was like, come on, guys, come on. Yeah. You guys could do better. I know you can.
And what are we doing here? And as I said, it's one villain out of what? 2, 3, 4 villains? Like, the reality is it's not the main villain, it's one of several. So it's hard to take away too much from it when there's other villains in the picture. So.
No, totally fair. So, what are your thoughts on the side characters now that I think we've developed a thorough understanding of some of these main characters here and the antagonist to the film? What are your thoughts on Luther? And, well, let's start with Luther, because Luther is the first character that you see a lot of in this film, and he dies in this film, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on him?
In the case of Luther, it probably would have been helped more. This is one of those instances we definitely probably should have seen 7 recently. We've already reviewed it on this podcast, and I forget what we reviewed it, what our scores were, and everything. Um, I just
I recall mine
and
being like a
fun.
6.5 or something like that.
I I do. Fun fact: the only two characters to show up in all 8 movies is Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt and Luther. Like
Yeah.
they're the only two characters to be in all of the movies. But Luther, I mean, for his appearance, he's okay. He's not a bad character. He's clearly helping. Like at this point, he's involved in the plot against the entity, and he's trying to do what he can to create the was it the pill? The shoot, I'm blanking
The
on the name of it.
virus that infects the entity, yeah. And they call it the pill or something like that.
The pill or the kill switch or something. Yeah, like he calls it that, and it's like he creates the device that should kill the entity. They just need the source code so that it can upload and then kill it off. Um, but yeah, his role in the movie is very short. He dies pretty soon within the first half hour of the movie, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Not really much more to say about him. And just generally, as far as side characters go, some of the I had a mixed bag. Like some of the characters, like the U.S. president and some others, I felt like were a little bit more fully fledged. They had clearly some motives, some like things driving their characters forward. But then there's
Yeah.
others who just felt like they're just there for Ethan Hunt and other characters to do as they say. They're just there for the sake of the plot. So
Right. Yeah. I would agree with that. Luther's arc is not so much encompassed in this film as much as it's the payoff off of a whole series, right? And so his death is supposed to be dramatic based off of all that we've seen of him previously. And I think even if you haven't seen the other films, his payoff is decent. They probably could have done something better there, but overall, it wasn't bad, and he contributed enough in this film that you were like, yeah, he's a great character. Crap, he's dead. He meant something here.
Well, this movie we haven't talked about this yet. This movie, but this movie really is a encapsulation of all the prior Mission Impossible movies in one, because they bring, as I said before, one of the people working in the U.S. government. What is his name? I can't. It bothers me. I can't remember his name, but he's the son of the villain of the first movie. Like, and they state that clearly. The scientist who was working the that safe that they raided in the very first movie is also back. They
Right.
encounter him on the island.
Dunlow.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, and we also from the movie, the third Mission Impossible movie, we finally get an answer of what the rabbit's foot was, because that has bearing on this movie as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right,
so
exactly.
it's just like they bring a bunch of stuff and information back from prior movies, and it comes together in this movie. So it kind of gives the movie like a finale feel, where it's like, okay, this is all coming together in this one movie. And it does help to add to some of the tension and some of the stakes in some cases.
And for your purposes, Avalon, the character's name is Jasper Briggs, but his real name is Jim Phelps Jr.
Okay.
So there you go.
Okay.
Since you were curious, I thought I'd throw that in for you, but keep going.
Okay. No, I just was gonna say that the rabbit's foot part I found interesting just from the storytelling perspective, because not only do they bring it back, but it more or less establishes that the events of the last few movies are indirectly Ethan's fault, because
Right.
of Mission Impossible 3 and him getting the rabbit's foot when he did. He brought because that's what the rabbit's foot was. It was an early form of the entity in its base form. And so he realizes, like, oh, that means everything up to this point is my fault.
Yep.
So what happens now is on me.
And they do try to somewhat capitalize off of the guilt of that, but they do move on pretty early from him being like, oh, this is my fault too. I'm going to do the right thing, which I already was going to do, which is stop the entity, kill it, stop Gabriel and the U.S. government and Russia and everyone else from using it for their own ends, trying to save humanity.
Yeah.
So it didn't add a ton there, but it definitely was present.
Yeah.
Or they tried to make it
it's one of the few points in the movie it felt like it deserved recognition for what it was. And it was an attempt at giving Ethan Hunt character development. even though I say he doesn't, he's kind of the same at the beginning to the end, and he still is. It's the one point in the movie where they try to do something to give his character more depth. So, but they do move on fairly quickly from that and continue on to other more important things, I guess.
Yeah,
So
yeah, totally. What are your thoughts on? Yeah, let's go with Grace. What are your thoughts on Grace, the person who was originally this pickpocket slash thief, and then turns into an IMF agent? Do you think she's compelling in this film or not?
I found her confusing, only because you got the impression that she's working with the like against Ethan, like with the U.S., and then she changes sides and suddenly decides randomly that she's going to be working with them, with Ethan, and it's one of those things where it's like I guess it doesn't. I mean, you can kind of explain it, but you can also kind of still raises questions. So
Right.
I found her confusing. That was my take. So
Yeah, well, pretty early on, she's basically, yes, Ethan Hunt, whatever you want, I'll do it. I'm on your side no matter what. And honestly, I think they do better with other female side characters in the Mission Impossible series in previous
yeah,
films than they do in this one. I'm not going to kill the film for that because, once again, side characters aren't a huge part of any film. They're not going to make or break it, right? So she wasn't a killer for me, but yeah, she could have used some work. What are your thoughts on Benji?
it's hard to. My problems with Benji are more or less that he started off as a comedic side character in this Mission Impossible movies, and now he's supposed to be kind of the serious side character. So his role has changed over the course of the movies.
Right.
Um, um, I mean, he's okay. I mean, he's an empathetic side character. He kind of like he's. I mean, Simon Pegg kind of brings a lovable side to him to the roles he plays. So I mean, you can't really hate the characters he plays.
Yeah. Well, and he's interesting because he has this backstory with Ethan, so he has motive for continuing to support his friend, unlike
Hmm.
characters like Grace, because they have a habit of killing off the female allies in these films. So Grace is
Yeah.
relatively new to the group, but Benji's been around. But at the same time, while he still supports him, he's unsure of being in a leadership role, and so he has to struggle through that in his own way. So he had his own mini arc, if you will, trying to figure that out, how to do that well. It was decent. I didn't hate his character, and I think they did him pretty decently.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on Paris, this female assassin character who has joined the ranks of Ethan's crew since the last film?
I mean, it made sense why she joined his crew. I mean, she's kind of was cut off. I mean, that was the one part of this movie. I actually completely forgot about her character until we watched till like they did the recap. That was the one thing the
Uh huh.
recap did, which was like, oh, that's right. She was a character that was working with the bad guys in the first movie, but
Right.
Ethan saved her life, spared her, and she was kind of cut off from the villains at the end of the movie. So it made sense why she was working with Ethan because she was more or less cut off. Um, other than that, she's kind of this like stock character who's like there to kick butt, I guess, like to kill. So
Yeah. No, she once again was a decent character, right? Not fully
mm,
unique, but she had her own motives. She wanted to kill Gabriel, right? And that was a
mm,
big push for her personally, and that's something that Ethan's constantly having to fight with her and saying, "No,
yeah,
we don't do this anymore. We're trying to do this the right way. We're not trying to just maliciously kill people for no reason." And her character had decent motive for everything that she was doing. Didn't have a huge problem with her. Enjoyed her aspect of the film. Once again, a good addition. Um, yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on each of the side characters because they
mm,
each have their own motive and value, but at the end of the day, they tie into Ethan's pretty well, and he's a primary
mm.
locus of focus in this film.
Even
That being
Deus,
said, huh?
the one side character you haven't talked that's on his team, the guy who was in the
Sure.
security
Yeah,
guard.
yeah, go ahead.
I think his
I
name is
didn't think he
Dacus.
was that compelling. He was just a side
He's
add-on for this film,
he's
in
literally
my
just there
opinion.
for the ride.
Yeah, basically.
Like, no, the way I interpreted it was like he's a security guard for Paris, and when he realizes that Ethan is gonna take her away to stop the entity, he's like, "Well, my job is over here," so he just joins Ethan. Just like
Basically, yeah. Yeah.
that's how my brain interpreted him, which is, I
Yeah.
mean, it never is explicitly stated, but that's just how it happened.
Right. And he's all gung ho for it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, the end of the world, might as well join this guy."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and you don't
So,
need fully fledged characters in every way. It just depends on where you want the emphasis to be, where you want
yeah.
the drama to be, and who
Yeah.
has emotional stakes. Which, going back to the president, is one of the aspects of this film. Do you think the president was a compelling character in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning?
I mean, at first it's hard to say, like, when I first saw her on the screen, I didn't understand completely where she was coming from. But as the movie
Sure.
progressed, you began to understand a little bit more what was happening and where she was coming from. Because she is trying to save lives and she is trying to prevent catastrophe. But at the same time, it's just like she's like trying to do what's logical and what's reasonable. But she's also like, she understands that we're living in a world, the entity, this AI intelligence, is monitoring all the digital, like the interweb and the internet.
Right.
So she's like trying to like clearly is like she's put in a position where it's like she's trying to think outside the box and trying to think, okay, what should I be doing? And so she's and while it was kind of cliche in the like it's kind of felt like a cliche moment where she just lets Ethan do his mission, it was also like she doesn't have a whole lot of options in terms of like stopping the entity aside from shutting down their own missile silos,
Right.
which I don't know. I guess I do want to ask you about that a little bit. Like, do you think it would have been reasonable for them to take their silos offline sooner in the movie in terms of the story? Because I felt like I was like, considering the situation and what's about to happen, wouldn't it make some level of sense at some point, like before, like especially once like China and Russia loses control of theirs, wouldn't you just turn yours off? Because at this point, it's you against the entity, and I don't know. I guess there was a part of me that wondered if that was an option, would you have done it? Consider that sooner.
Yeah, I tried very hard not to take my personal research because, I used to do competitive speech and debate, and nuclear proliferation was a topic I researched a decent amount. So I tried not to implement that aspect into my understanding of this film because, they're telling their own narrative, but there was
Yeah.
some questions internally for me on that aspect of it, more so in regards to one, what about our anti-missile defense systems, right? We have the whole THAAD system that exists to defend against ICBMs. We also, nuclear arsenals in Russia are far greater than they made them out to be in this film. They at least rival the US. I believe they actually eclipse ours, but I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. But they have a ton of nukes, and several of these nations could destroy the entire Earth the world over with their own nuclear arsenal. So, if they just took over the US's, that should be the case. If they took over Russia's, I believe that also should be the case. So I don't know that they necessarily need to take every single nation's nuclear arsenal to actually destroy all of the world if you're being truly accurate to the world today. But I wasn't. I tried not to let that influence my aspect of understanding the film. Right? They're trying to show that everyone's done for. Right?
Yeah.
And then the question is, I guess the whole idea of not taking them offline is that if they pinpoint accurately where the nukes are located, they can destroy those locations preemptively so they can't launch. And that's the idea of, we don't really want to do this, right? We already saw what happened back in World War II when we destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that was terrible, right? There is a lot of debate around that, but the general consensus is that the amount of death that occurred from 2 nukes was astronomical and should not be repeated. Nukes nowadays are far more powerful than the nukes they had back then and could destroy a lot more. And so if you're going to launch one of those, you need a lot of motive and reason for doing so. So that's where the tension comes in, right? Do you really want to do this much destruction, and are you actually going to save humanity by doing so? So I thought in regards to waiting till the last minute and having that in your back pocket was somewhat reasonable, and then the president having to make that decision, right? Am I actively going to destroy millions of lives for the sake of saving humanity? Or am I going to trust this person to complete their objective? I thought it was compelling enough, basically, is where I come down to on that. Just because as the president, she tries to shove off the guilt of that and say, Ethan, if you don't complete this mission, everyone's death is your fault, right? And she says that more or less in the film. But at the same time, she's the one pushing the button, and she recognizes that. And so the president has to then step back and go, even though I tried to push off the responsibility, at the end of the day, I am actively making a decision to kill lives. And am I really willing to do that? And she says no. It's not. And she waits till the very last minute to make that decision. Is that ideal? Probably not, but it's understandable given the scenario. I think they built it up well enough that I was okay with it. I thought the president's whole dramatized understanding of that was fine.
Okay.
That was maybe a little more than what was necessary, but those are my thoughts.
No, I just, because, we're almost, given this option last minute in the movie, where it's we could, just shut down our silos so the entity can't get access to them. Which, I don't know, considering how that was another option, it was why wasn't this stated sooner? I don't know. I felt like it was kind of a weird time to bring that up. So.
Yeah, and you could make the argument that maybe they could have just shut them down earlier and reduced the opportunity to enter, right? Until they needed it last minute and then turn them back on. I don't know. I think the movie was already 2 hours and 50 minutes long, so you don't want to get too caught up in little details like that. But maybe there's something there. I'm not going to say there's not. Yeah, so those are most of the main characters I thought were relevant. I don't know if there's anyone else you wanted to mention as honorary or anything like that. The two that came to my mind in this film that I just thought just stuck out as fun little aspects to this are, one, Jack Dunlow, a.k.a. Milchek from Severance. Love to see him in the movie. Was a little disappointed I didn't get to see him do a little Severance dance, because that man is made to dance. Honestly, that guy's got the moves, and he deserves to show them on screen anytime. So, I love seeing him in the film. I think he's a great actor, and it was just a little fun side bit for me. His side character was not critical. Well, he had good elements to the film. He wasn't a huge aspect of the film, but he was fun, and I liked seeing him. The other one was personally my favorite character in this film, is a side character, and her name is Topisa. She's the Inuit wife of William Dunlow. And honestly, she had so much personality for not saying a single word I understood. So much fun. Honestly, every time she showed up on screen, I'm like, yes, let's go. You go, girl. Do your thing. She's just smiling, waving at people, helping people pull out parts of a bomb and cutting wires and whatnot, handing people wrenches as they fix the world. Great. Loved it, So, maybe a side bit, but they had some fun characters like that I really enjoyed seeing, and they were just small aspects of the film, but they played into it well. So, that's all I got for this film. Would you change your rating?
As I was going over my review, I think I miscalculated certain points. So I realized that after, but not that was a huge deal. Some of the conversation, I think maybe I was a little harsh on certain points, so maybe I'd raise it to 5, just flat 5. So
yeah, no, that's fair.
And the reality is that I did enjoy my viewing of this movie. This is one of those movies where it's the action sequences are kind of make it worth at least one watch.
Oh yeah,
so
for sure.
And I mean, honestly, like I would probably sit down and rewatch some of those action sequences on their own just because they're cool. I mean, the
Yeah,
fact, I mean, it also helps that the plane sequence was shot like most of it is real. Like they didn't use a green screen or VFX for that. Like
right.
when you
Which is
realize know that
crazy.
when you know that going into the movie and watching it, it's like this is insane. You're watching a guy essentially like clinging for dear life, like going over the wings of a plane and over the other parts of it, just like he could fall to his death any moment. Like it just.
Yep. Yep. It's insane.
Oh.
Tom Cruise is an animal. It's crazy to see him do the stuff he does on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I probably will leave mine where it's at, but there's a reason for
Yeah.
that, right? You see the tension they build
Yeah.
up in this film, even for all the stock things they have in it, it's still enjoyable, and that
Yeah.
speaks to the power of certain elements of storytelling. So that's what you got, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the pod.
Yeah.
That's it. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.